Hey team, Alex here. So today's discussion is going to be about what's called the McGill Big 3. And this was pioneered by Stuart McGill, who's probably one of the leading experts in spine biomechanics in the world. If you've never heard of him, I would seriously encourage you to seek out his writings, read some of his books, educate yourself on your spine health and how you can manage it and be stable there. Some good books to start with would be The Back Mechanic or The Gift of Injury. I would highly recommend those, starting with those two. So last week we talked about general activity levels in quarantine and restructuring how you warm up for your training sessions. Today we're going to talk about those McGill Big 3 exercises. And the 3 exercises can be used for back pain rehabilitation. It can also be used for like taking your medicine for spine health. So if you could think about it like taking fish oil pills. It's something you could do every day to help maintain the integrity of your spine and the core musculature around your torso, just overall spine health in general. And so these 3 exercises consist of a modified curl up, which really isn't actually a curl up at all, and we'll go over all these in just a sec. But the modified curl up, a side plank and its progressions and regressions, and the bird dog and its progressions and regressions. And so we'll go over all that in just a second, but in continuing with the theme of warming up for your training session, we also want to be thinking about warming up for these core activation drills or trunk stability drills. And because especially if we're in a state where we're rehabbing a pained back or coming back from some kind of back injury, we want to be able to get some movement in our spine before we go in with a bunch of activation. And so 2 things that are highly recommended before doing these 3 big exercises are the cat-cow or cat-camel and some slow lunging. And the lunging can be modified, especially if you're still in some back pain, some residual back pain, or if you can't perform a lunge without using some kind of stabilizer. So if we're looking at the cat-cow or cat-camel, we want to set up with our wrists just under our shoulders and our knees just under our hips. And really we only need to move in and out of this motion like 7 to 10 times. We don't really need much more movement than that. You don't need to do a prolonged warm-up for this. And so what we want to think about is just gentle motion in the spine, having your cervical and your thoracic and your lumbar spine all moving into flexion and extension at the same time. And we don't really want to be pushing at the end ranges of our flexion and extension. We just want to think about motion. We want to think about that concept of just like getting the spine moving, getting the fluid going, kind of lessening the stiffness in your spine. All the while still maintaining light bracing in your core. And so we really only need to do, like I said, 7 to 10 repetitions there before we've reached some effective juices. And so 7 to 10 repetitions of the cat-cow, and then we can go into some slow bodyweight lunges. 2 things to think about would be, and this goes for all the exercises that we're going to be doing, is nice upright spine, neutral spine, and then continuously bracing in your torso, right? And so we just need to do, 3 to 5 repetitions on each side, nice and slow, not compromising alignment in your spine, being nice and tall, keeping your abdominal wall braced throughout the movement. And if you need to hold on to something, you can hold on something to the side. And so we've gone through a set or two of that. Really, we don't need too much to warm up the spine for these exercises. So, going into the big three, we're gonna start with the curl up. And the curl up is really like high interior core activation dominant exercise. And so when we see people doing a lot of like core exercises, we look at them and most people are doing these like flexion dominant exercises. Well, we want to be building, especially in back rehabilitation stances or just like good spine biomechanics, a good neutral spine, right? We don't want to be thinking about throwing our spine into constant flexion. If you think about like having a paper clip and bending that paper clip back and forth, well, eventually it's going to split. And so we want to be thinking about, you know, using these abdominal exercises or these trunk stability exercises in a way that is safe for our spine. And so the modified curl up is a great way to get good activation in your torso without compromising spinal integrity. And so how it's going to work is you're going to lay on the ground. One leg is going to be straight on the floor. One leg is going to be bent at about 90 degrees. And your head, neck, shoulders are all going to be one unit, right? And we think of these like sit-ups as leading with our head, constantly flexing our neck. Well, in the curl up, we don't necessarily want to be doing something different there. We want to be able to keep our head, neck, and shoulders as one continuous unit, really have the work come from our abdominals. And so to brace for your lumbar, right, to make some space for the lumbar curvature so that we're not totally throwing ourselves into flexion or like, you know, compromising neutral spine, our fingers are going to go under the low curve of your back. You're going to begin by bracing in your abdominal wall and lifting your elbows up off the ground. And we want to be thinking about like using that abdominal contraction to lift our head, neck, and shoulders up off the ground. But we don't need to come up super high. We just need to be thinking about like if you use the imagery of holding your head on a scale and then using that abdominal contraction to have the scale read 0. So you don't need, we're not worried about how high you can get your head off the ground. It's about how much pressure you can maintain in your core, right? And so it's going to look like this. Right? And so you would do, 6 to 4 repetitions on each side. Brace in your abdominals, press your fingers into the ground. Elbows get lifted slightly off of the ground. Brace hard. Back down. And you do all repetitions on one side, switch legs, and do all your repetitions on the other side. Okay, so from there, we're going to go into the side plank. And lots of times, people have trouble holding a full-on side plank with their legs extended. And so to regress this exercise, because remember, if we're coming from a rehab standpoint, we don't want to work into pain. We want to avoid pain as much as we can and build muscular endurance before going into harder progressions of the exercise. And so the place to start with this side plank would be a side bridge. And so you're going to be on your knees and your elbow. And from here, starting position would be neutral spine, braced in your torso. Your hand can go on the bottom shoulder in front of your deltoid. And then you're going to hinge from your hips, squeeze your glutes nice and tight, brace in your core, hold this for about 8 to 10 seconds, and then we're going to hinge out of that and switch sides, right? And so we'd have an ideal rep count. We'll talk about the reps at the end, but that would be a good place to start. From there, we can progress that by taking our hand off our shoulder, putting in our hips, hinging from there, bringing our hips forward, looking for a nice straight line between my head and my knees, nice and tight, good contractions, and then out of there. Progressing from there, we would go to a staggered stance side plank. And the reason that we put our top leg in front of our back leg, or our bottom leg, right? You can see how my feet are staggered. This provides a good base of stability. It also allows us to transition from one side to the other seamlessly without having to futz around. And so our progression into the side plank, hinge from the ground, our hand can go on the side. We're holding this position for 8 to 10 seconds. And then as you get strong here, as your muscular endurance in this position increases, we can go ahead and add some rotation to it. And so we're gonna roll from one side to the other. And the big things to pay attention to when we're moving within the side plank is hip integrity and core stability, right? And so we wanna watch out for losing that tension as we roll from one side to the other. So I would encourage you to take it nice and slow and pay attention and be critical. Are you losing integrity as you transition from one side to the other? If so, where? And then trying to target those places and think about sending tension to that area. And so the way that this is gonna look is you would start leg straight, hinge from your hips, gonna hold for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then I'm gonna roll to a plank and then gently roll to the other side. Again, trying to maintain core integrity, strong on one side, keeping my glutes activated, 5 to 10 seconds, and then rolling to the other side. Okay, and we would perform that for this set number of repetitions there. So let's say you made it through your curl up and your side planks, and now we're gonna move into our bird dogs. And so this really targets like the extensors of our back, and it's also very spine sparing in and of itself. And so this would be like contradictory to what like a Superman might look like, right? Some extreme extension under load, not such a great thing for people, especially those who are coming out of, back pain rehab and moving into like trying to get a little bit stronger and more stable in their torso. So just like with the cat camel or the cat cow, we're gonna go wrists under shoulders, knees under hips, and a good starting point for this would be to just move one limb at a time, right? And so wrists under shoulders, knees under hips, finding that good neutral spine, bracing in your abdominals, and then we're gonna start by just moving one leg at a time, right? And so extending in that leg, trying to make sure that we can maintain good core stability the whole time. One of the things that you want to pay attention to is when you extend that limb, what happens to the integrity of your hips? Do you open up a little bit? Are you dropping on one side? We want to try to maintain good neutral spine, good square hips, good square shoulders. And a big deal here becomes leading with your heel, right? We can point our toes. That enables us to kind of open in our hips, and we lose a little bit of activation in that extended leg. So thinking about pointing with your heel instead of your toes when you extend your leg. So a progression from there would be extending the opposite arm with the leg that is extending. And so that's gonna look like this. Find neutral spine for you, brace in your abdominals, and then at the same time, you're looking to extend your arm and your leg, and we don't ever need to extend past our hips or our shoulders, right? That's putting me into some spinal extension there, and we don't really want to do that. We don't want to compromise that stability in our torso, and so we really only need to go to about shoulder and hip height, and we're looking for good contractions at the end of that range of motion. And you might progress this by squeezing your fist as you extend in that arm. Good, nice, strong contraction there. Hold for 5 to 10 seconds, back down to midline, and repeat on the other side. So, you've got your big 3 exercises. Things to consider. how do you organize the repetitions and the sets that you do this in? Well, one of the suggestions that McGill gives is starting with what he coins and what's called a Russian descending order. And what that means is you basically are subtracting repetitions as you get deeper into your sets. And the big deal there is, or the take home for that is, that the farther you get into your session, the less repetitions you're doing, and so the less fatigue you have during the individual set. And so a good starting place to be would be 3 sets. Your first set, you're going to do 6 reps on each side. Your second set, you're going to do 4 reps on each side. And your third set, you're going to do 2 reps on each side. And so this affords you the ability to hold structural integrity and perform the exercises as best you can as fatigue sets in down the line. Because when we're talking about building muscular endurance, or coming back in from rehab and building more strength, we always want to be thinking in terms of what is the integrity of the exercise that I'm doing, and the movement patterns with which I'm moving in, right? Because we're constantly learning those movement patterns, and if we put ourselves under serious fatigue, our movement starts to degrade. And so we want to be able to keep the integrity of that quite high, and we do that by subtracting repetitions as we get deeper into our sets. And so again, think about a good starting place to be would be like first set with 6 reps, second set with 4 reps, third set with 2 reps, and call it good. A way you might progress from that would either be to add more repetitions and then just go by subtracting 2 reps from your original starting point. And so you could go like 8, 6, 4. And then once you're getting into that realm where you've reached a pretty high number of repetitions, then you can start adding more and more duration to the exercise. And next week we'll go into a little bit more of progressing these exercises to make them a little bit more challenging, but still keeping the integrity of your spine and improving your strength and endurance over time. I hope that helps, and see how it goes.